G'day, I'm Jonathan Lee and welcome to The Backstory, where we go down a rabbit hole with those of knowledge, influence and power. Today's guest, well, people either love or hate him. He was the Deputy Prime Minister, more famous for kicking out Johnny Depp's dogs, until an affair with a younger staffer changed his life forever. Time.
Jono.
Can I start you off on a lighter note?
Yep.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty. Your university rugby career.
Mm-hmm.
From what I read, you suffered one lost front tooth.
That's right.
Distended spleen.
That's correct.
28 stitches across your face.
Mm-hmm.
Fractured ribs and a partially popped shoulder. Did you ever think about working on your step?
That was probably across my rugby career. The distended spleen I got of all things after scoring a try and falling on the ball. Then ended up in intensive care. Front tooth, that was just knocked out by another player who obviously didn't agree with me that day. And I don't know, must have put my head in the wrong places. And that's life of a lot of people playing footy. I don't think it's anything too different. And also broke some bones in my hand as well.
It's almost life of a politician.
No, footy's a lot harder.
Where'd you get the start? Where'd you get the stitches?
My lip, on the side of my face, across the top of my eye. Got all sorts of places, sometimes one or two, sometimes 8.
Yeah.
But I remember once playing a game and I couldn't work out why I was dribbling, because I kept them right in my mouth and going, but there's nothing there, but there was a hole right through below. It was just pouring out through a hole below my lips.
Were you a decent rugby player?
Look, I was good for the comp I was in. I wasn't Mark Ellis, so just make sure we deal with that issue straight away.
Can you tell me about Lieutenant Colonel John P. Joyce?
Look, a person I never really knew but had a huge effect in our family because he was my father's father. Both my mother's father and my father's father were both returned servicemen from the First World War, but my dad's father was rather exceptional. He arrived in Gallipoli on the first day, left on the last. He then went to the Western Front. He was in some of the horrific areas he was in. He was in one where everybody around him was killed and he was the only one left alive. He got a Distinguished Conduct Medal, which I think was, for his rank, was one below a VC for bravery under fire on the Western Front. As a sergeant at that time, he was the highest ranking person. Everyone else of a higher rank, I think, had perished.
It's incredible to think about, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and then in the second, then between the wars, at one stage there's a photo I have of him next to what would be the King of England, because he was in charge of his bodyguard.
Wow.
And then during the Second World War, he was in pursuit of the Japanese. I think he went right up into the islands. I'm not quite sure it was Guadalcanal, but I hear from one of my cousins at one stage they actually got back to my grandmother and said he's dead, And then he popped up on an island. I came back to him and said, "Oh, he's not dead, he's alive." And this was one person's life. And at one stage he was what they call the CRA, which is a Commander of the Royal Artillery. And what's interesting about that, he'd gone from the very bottom to the very top.
Wow. His
retiring commission was Lieutenant Colonel. But, that is, and so I think that it made a very high bar of what you have to do and how much you have to throw yourself into things. And my mother's father, he was also on the Western Front, and at one stage he was within a mile of where my other grandfather was. And the interesting thing for him is he was 16 years, 8 months old. He lied about his age, went off to the Western Front, and got very, very sick, and came home. So I've always said, even that they were basically before my time, they embedded a culture of never be a malingerer. If you've got a problem, sure, you got a problem, but don't ever do a put on. Unless it's really serious, grin and bear it.
Yeah. What do you think that group of men knew that perhaps today's youth don't?
Oh, well, look,
men and women, I should say, also.
Right, mate, the resilience of them. These people came back from a war, and there wasn't sort of, people weren't sort of trying to, there wasn't all consultancies, and maybe there should have been. There was just like, oh, well, welcome back, off you go.
Yeah.
That's it, And I remember talking to another mate, and he said what happened when he came back from a war. He was a Second World War veteran. They gave him a rough block, and he lived in a tent for 2 or 3 years, just what they call cleaning the block up. Never complained. That was, what they expected was going to happen. There was a real sense of you got to suck it up and deal with it and move on. When you look back at some of these people's lives, they were obviously traumatised, what we would now call PTSD, and solidly that way, where their treatment probably was beating up their wives or drinking vastly too much, rather than getting effective treatment. But the essence I've got is the worst thing you could be called was a malingerer, someone who couldn't deal with it, and so you had to have they had great sympathy for people who were genuinely hurting, and an incredible disdain for someone who was putting it on.
I don't want to get too much into your personal life, especially not yet, but do you think that's affected the way you've thought about some of what you've gone through?
In a way, yes. I always thinking it's because politicians don't have problems. Kids in cancer wards have problems. Politicians don't. What you can do is you can be insulted, you can be belittled, but they're not going to kill you. There's no one's going to get shot. You might, if very worse, you lose your job. And so you've always got to be mindful that when you think it's going to hurt the most, that's when you've got to stand up and be counted. When you think, when in your mind you say, I should just sit down and shut up, that's actually how, I suppose, in that culture it comes into you. No, this is the time you actually stand up and speak up. And I suppose if you want an example, even if it's unpopular, and you want an example of that, well, as you know, I have a pro-life position, and there were demonstrations down here, and the advice you get is, oh mate, just stay away from it, stay away from it, stay away from it. There's no votes in that, stay away from it. And you think, yeah, I should, and then you think, no, I shouldn't, because that's when you got to stand up, when you will lose friends because you had to do the right thing. And I suppose in the time in politics, when you think, oh, if I just shut up, everyone will think I'm a jolly good fellow and everything will go fine. You think, no, you got to stand up, and you probably will get into strife, and it probably will cause grief. But that's what you got to do.
Do you think sometimes your family members wish you just would shut up?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and it's and that's because they get sucked into your turmoil,
into your vortex.
Yeah, that's right, I suppose. But once more, I think it's what a lot of politicians have is am I one side they say you're a good person if you're a team player, and then the contrary of that is you're a coward if you never stand up, and you're a strong person if you stand up, but you're a rabble rouser and a troublemaker if you stand up. And these are the plays that are in your brain, and you've got to try and work out which one's which. But make sure you pick the right one, not the one that's an excuse for not doing anything.
What do you think the constituents think about that? Because many might not realise maybe the passion you come to it, or how conscientious you are about your opinion. And you're very divisive in some regards. Yeah. Some people dislike you vehemently, and others love you. A private story, as I said to you off camera just before we started, that you passed a woman today, and I watched her visibly hiss at you. And,
that's right.
And you were shocked, and I saw your face drop, and you seemed frustrated, and you seemed saddened, and you didn't know whether you wanted to go back and say something.
Yeah, I did.
And in the end, you kind of just turned and you walked into the room.
Yeah.
What goes through you at those moments?
Oh, well, you have you take two times. So there's one person who stopped on the street, honked the horn, wanted to talk to me, and was happy, right? I do. I know that. I get really strong supporters, and they really like you. And another lady who was in a wheelchair, and she was telling me the last time she met me, and that's good. And I accept. And there are people who can't stand me, and I just always, I suppose it doesn't worry me, but I felt like going back to that person and saying, of all the energy you have in your life, why would you put your energy into that? What is to be, when you think that to make a statement of anger for the purpose of what? For, you know, right, embellishing yourself around your friends, it's a bad thing. Like, it's to have that much anger and to have it in your life is going to cause problems. You know, I think it was Horace who said, anger is a passing madness, and the best thing to do is to make sure that you have control of it. Otherwise, it will be master of you. And it sounds strange. Would you, like most people, would you walk past someone and start hissing? You don't.
But people feel they have a right sometimes with you.
Yeah, they have a right. But you think, and I suppose there's other times that annoys me. If I'm minding my own business. In that area, it wasn't so much because it was a public area, and I suppose that's she can do it. But I really get annoyed if I'm going for a walk and I'm really trying to stay away from everything, and somebody thinks it's upon them to, say something that's, derogatory, and then they get amazed when you actually respond to it, and they feel that you have no right of response. You just have to accept their derogatory statement, even though you're walking through a park.
I know you have a tough exterior, but at that moment you look genuinely sad.
I was annoyed by it, I suppose. I just thought it's unnecessary. Like for that lady, I just thought it's so unnecessary. It lacks style. It just lacks style. It lacks finesse, and it's obviously a person possessed by anger, and that's no good for you.
Tell me about the family you grew up with. Tamworth,
Yeah.
one of 6 on a cattle property.
Yeah, it was that's
The youngest?
Right. No, I was the second youngest.
Second youngest.
Unfortunately, my younger brother passed away a year or so ago. But it was a beautiful life. I wrote about this in my book. You know nothing else when you grow up in the land. Your world is the horizon of the hills around you. Work is not work. It is just your life. And then I suppose, and it affects you in such a way as you always think that is your actual home. That's where you've got to get back to. You're like Odysseus. You're always reaching back to Ithaca, where you want to get back to. And you feel by reason of that everything else is sort of a bob and cork on an ocean, but trying to sort of get back to where you are closest to who you really are as a person. Which for me, I'm closest to who I really am as a person. Behind a mob of sheep or behind a mob of cattle, or you're just working on the land.
And yet you chose Parliament.
Yeah, I did.
A bit mad.
Yeah, I suppose I did. I had a fascination in a way for public, without trying to sound too grandiose. Public service, was St Vincent de Paul or Rotary, or just doing stuff. And the vast majority of what you do in politics is public service. It's not really politics. It's trying to help other people.
I want to get to how you entered politics, but I'd like to first ask you, in your maiden speech to the House, because you gave one to the Senate before you moved into the lower house, and we'll talk about that transition, but you talked about wanting the affirmation of your father as a boy, seeing him go off and your older brothers go off on the horses.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, you want to be a man, and to be a man means you go out to work, and I suppose the affirmation comes from people, other men or adults, recognising that you've done a good job, because it's a sign that you have become something. Like if you could master a mob of cattle when other people couldn't, if you put up a fence and it was well constructed, if you could get through and drench a heap of sheep, and get a big day's work done, and where people could say, gee whiz, that's a hard job and you've done it. And especially if you've done it by yourself, then especially if you can do things that other people can't do. And as a very young kid, you're really itching to get out. You see your older brothers go out and they're going out working, and rather than being scared of work, you want to be part of it. You want to be part of that group that's going out to work today. You don't want to be staying in the house with mum.
Yeah.
You want to be out with the men, with your brothers. I suppose in life, someone would say you should really pay attention to being at home with mum too, because that's a beautiful time of your life, and maybe you don't realise it.
Do you think younger children have less fear than their older siblings?
Oh no, I think there's different fears now. I think the world's changed that. Once upon a time, when I was a kid, you go down the creek, you make a bridge, you build dams, you make a boat, you do all these other things. parents weren't really around to be, when you think about it. When I was a kid, you'd go home, grab a rifle and go out shooting. And to do that as maybe an 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid, you didn't even ask permission. It was just like, oh, if you want to do that, just do it. Just off you go. You know, imagine that now. I'm home, I'm just grabbing the 22. I'm going to duck down to the Lane Cove National Park and shoot a rabbit. I think people would get a bit upset.
Well, I remember chatting with a gentleman who I respected. I would have been in my mid-20s, and he was talking about the days when you'd take your rifle on the train. I mean, you couldn't imagine anyone carrying a gun on the train anymore.
No.
You'd grow up and you'd have chickens in your backyard, and you'd use those chickens
for eggs
to feed your family, or eggs or to feed your family. And could you imagine now knowing that the next door neighbour had actually killed his chook, had cut its head off, and was plucking out the feathers? I mean, people would be up in arms, wouldn't they?
You'd think about a shoot and cut the head off. Yeah, like that's a little funnel thing. Well, we used to, yes, you know, and I don't want to sound like, you know, Bear Grylls or something like this, but this is real. On Thursday night, we killed a sheep because that's how you fed the family. You had your own vegetables, and that sort of passed on. You used to have your own cow, milk that every morning. That sort of passed on when you started buying milk. But right to the end, you were always killing a sheep, you know, and that was sort of one of the chores. Like, you know, have you got a sheep in? You got to kill a sheep with a house out of meat. And it's generally on a Thursday night or a Friday night, and then you'd kill it last thing, and then you'd bring it down. You'd hang it at the meat house, so it's what they call set. And then you'd cut it up. I could cut up a sheep in 20 minutes, no problems at all. Have it all ready to go, and probably kill it and gut it and skin it in 15 the night before. But it's funny, I never enjoyed killing an animal. I still don't. I don't like killing anything that you don't have to kill. But you know, I also completely understand the necessity of it. If you've got to eat, you've got to eat.
Yeah. Tell me about Woolbrook Public School. I understand as a boy at the age of 10, you were asked what you wanted to do for a job one day, and you said you wouldn't mind being the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
As an ambitious child.
Yeah, and I remember there was a girl I went to school with called Nita, and she reminded me of that at an airport. And
you don't remember it?
Not directly. They certainly remembered it, and but I knew I had an interest in politics. I knew right back to then I had an interest in politics. Why? Because everything you do on the land generally goes back to a political discussion. Cattle prices are good, it's a political discussion. There's a strike on, political discussion. The road's not fixed, political discussion. You know, regulations about what you can do and what you can't do, political discussion. And so there's so much when you live on the land that revolves around politics, and that's why I believe that people on the land, in essence, are a lot more connected to politics. They're aware of politics, they're aware of political figures, and they have strong political views. And you can see that even in parties. A lot of parties start in country areas. You know, the Labor Party started in Barcaldine. You know, the National Party started obviously in the country. You would say that now with the existence of new parties, shooters and fishers, that itself is a country. It's a thing. Because the country is the area where the consequences of political decisions are more expressly seen. Even Bob Brown, he was from Glen Innes in the New England originally. His uncle was a policeman in Manila. He came from a country area.
You went to the local public school, but you actually ended up at a pretty darn good high school.
That's right.
Elite GPS Sydney School, Riverview, St Ignatius.
Yep, very lucky. I went to, I had to repeat, obviously. I went down there when I went to...
Did you really?
Yeah, because I was basically semi-literate as far as they were concerned. They were speaking Latin and I was struggling with English.
And now you talk about Greek mythology, and I know in previous speeches you've talked about Rome and...
Yeah, well, it's more... I would never profess that I was any... it planted a seed, which only grew much later on after I left. I was sort of more frustrated at what I hadn't learned rather than what I did learn whilst I was there. But Woolbrook was... It really affected my politics, I suppose. When I ever mentioned the weatherboard and iron, I'm sort of really reaching right back to my time at Woolbrook. I had a great love of my primary school years, especially Woolbrook. I thought it was probably one of the that really gentle times of your life.
Yeah. Were you a good student?
No, at times it fluctuated. I could be good and I could be bored. I think I could have put a lot more effort in. I always look back, and I think I had glandular fever because I just couldn't. My last year at school, I just couldn't stay awake. It was just the most perverse thing. I would go somewhere, I'd just fall asleep, and then I'd try and go back to my room, and you weren't supposed to be in your room. I'd fall asleep under the bed. I just couldn't stay awake. It was, and I think back and I think, oh, that's probably glandular fever that I had. So I didn't. My last year was a struggle.
I was imagining a kid who was good at sport, who probably talked a lot and wasn't very good at homework.
No, I could. I wasn't stupid. If I wanted, I could work.
Did you? Did they still have the cane back then?
Yeah, absolutely. I got belted all the time. I got belted at school, primary school. I got belted at Riverview. That was something I was quite good at.
You were quite good at it?
Quite good at getting hit. But but not that I was proud of it. I suppose I carried a grudge about it.
There's got to be a story. Give me one story.
I remember. Yeah, I can remember once we're told to walk, and I kind of jogged, and I got 6 for it. And I tell you what, you say 6, they hurt.
Yeah.
They hurt. You belted with a leather strap and a piece of sort of metal inside it. You belted for this, you belted for that, and that's how one person controls a big heap of boys. You step out of line, they belt you. And but the funny thing was, sometimes you knew there was something personal in it, like the priest or whatever just didn't like you, or the brother didn't like you. But if it was impersonal, it hurt, but it didn't personally worry you. You just thought, oh, well, that's the rap. You did this, got caught, got belted. But it only annoyed you if you thought, this has escalated because you personally don't like me. That's why that's why you're doing this. That's why I always remember that. We were told to walk, and I jogged, and I got sick. And I remember 6, which really hurt. And looking at the guy, I said, "Why 6? I'm like, surely it's only with 2, maybe 1. 6, really?" And I could just see in his eyes, he just didn't like me.
You went back to New England for university.
Yep.
And I was looking at some of your past employment. You actually worked as a bouncer very
That's
briefly.
Correct. Yeah.
Barnaby the bouncer, was he ruthless? Was he going in with a headlock? What was Barnaby the bouncer like?
I think he was looking for something to do that wasn't back on the farm a lot of the time. Yeah. I'd get you into town, get a bit of money, and I think a lot of people do it. Get you a bit of pocket money. I did it once, just by chance, and then it went all right. And they asked me if I'd go back and continue doing it. I tell you what it does teach you, if nothing else, it teaches you that the best thing to use in your life in conflict is your brain. Learn to talk. I suppose that at times it teaches you, like everything else, there's times you're going to have to stand your ground, and even though you might be a bit scared, stand your ground and deal with the situation. But honest to God, I wouldn't advise anybody to do that job. At times it can be pretty ordinary.
Were you good in a stink?
Yeah, I suppose I was better than, let's just say I was better than average.
It sounds like you were well trained.
Yeah, well, if you want to make a big man of yourself, you'll soon find someone who's better than you, put it that way.
Yeah. Tell me about how you came to politics. Was it a meeting, a conversation?
It's the same thing that brings you to St Vincent de Paul, that brings you to Rotary, that brings you to picking up papers. What brings you to politics is a desire for public service, a view that you can make Australia a better place.
But did you go looking for it, or did somebody come to you with a conversation one day?
I'll tell you exactly what happened. I thought about it once, and it just didn't really follow through when I was in Kingaroy, because Kingaroy lived in the sort of shadow of what had been Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, who I was a big fan of, and still am. And I was at Charleville, which is in Western Queensland, and next door to where I was working at a company called QIDC, Queensland Industry Development Corporation, was the National Party office. And I literally walked out my door into the door next door and thought, I should join. And I joined. And that was it. And so it was very fortunate, I suppose, that it wasn't the Labor Party office next door. Otherwise, I'd be the signed up member of the AWU, I suppose. But it was the National Party office.
Can you give me a Workers United will never be defeated?
No, I can't. What's their song they always sing? Solidarity Forever. So I went in there, and you know, you go to your first meeting and it's just good people. They're not rah-rah, they're just good people who are trying to get a bridge built or trying to get a road sealed, and they're using that forum as a mechanism to drive that issue forward. And then I really enjoyed the people I was with because they were interesting. You know, people involved with politics. You know, as they was it Eleanor Roosevelt? She said, you know, small minds talk about people, larger minds talk about events, and great minds talk about ideas. And politics manages to do all three.
You, in 2004, you were elected to the Senate in Queensland, I should say.
Yep.
You won back a Senate seat for the Nationals
That's
that had
correct.
been lost.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is bragging, but the one thing I think that, you know, if there was a political epitaph, I did something that's never going to be done again. I won back a Senate seat when I was in the Senate. That was lost. We'd lost it. Bill O'Chee lost it, and it was held by One Nation. And we did not get on a coalition Senate ticket. It was the National Party by itself. And in that battle, the seat was held by there was the Democrats, there was the Greens, there was Pauline Hanson. There was also One Nation. She was separate. And there was the Liberal Party. So I had on one side Pauline Hanson campaigning against me. I had on the other side the Democrats, the Australian Democrats, campaigning against me. In another corner I had the Greens. And then I had this bloke called John Winston Howard in the Liberal Party campaigning against me. Nobody gave us a chance of winning it. No one thought we had a snowflake's chance of winning back this seat. And I thought once John Howard started campaigning against me that I didn't have much of a chance either. But we won it back. It was coincidence. It was hard work, but we won it back. And I suppose that's what, when I went to Canberra, I always bore that in mind. You go into the joint party room, they say, "Oh, you've got to be a team player," and you'd say, "Well, you weren't much of a team player when you're trying to get rid of me. And now that we're here, you've only just cleaned the blade off, and he's saying you want to be my mate, you know." And that stuck with me all the way through. So winning back a Senate seat was very important. I made absolutely certain that the next time there was an election, they'd know who I was, so I wouldn't be in that predicament again. And the next time, I think there was 11,000 people went below the line to put me number one as their number one choice. So
is that perhaps one of the reasons why you made a virtue of crossing the floor 28 times?
It certainly gave me license. And people say, "Oh, that's outrageous." So no, you campaigning against me at the last election was outrageous. You know, that's you know, we'll do what's best. And then later on, you know, resigning from that, coming down to New South Wales and doing it all again, standing against a guy who had a 23% margin and winning a lower house seat. Now that'll never happen again. A person winning back a Senate seat and then later on to go and win back a House of Representatives seat. And for degree of difficulty, I did it in 2 different states.
Under the Westminster parliamentary system we have, if you're a member of cabinet, you have to vote with the government.
That's correct.
Is that something you still support? Or is we're at a time and age now where the public are crying out for authenticity, and a politician perhaps should be able to stand on their own?
They cry out for both. I mean, look, authenticity is the side I'm on, but they also, if you vote against the government, they say you're a rebel rouser, you're trying to bring down the government, no matter which way you look, when you read your emails, there's going to be someone who doesn't like your approach. So be guided by what you think is right and then try and stick to it.
So does that mean a cabinet minister should be able to differentiate themselves from the government?
Probably not. Otherwise, cabinet's ridiculous. In cabinet, there's a decision process that is made, and if you are going to differentiate from cabinet, you have to certainly offer, I believe, offer your resignation. That might be accepted, but say, well, but you've got to be brave enough to say on this issue, it's important enough that we might have to go our separate ways.
Should politicians cross the floor?
There's one. Yes. Okay. What I can't stand is this. Tell me the last person from the Labor Party to cross the floor. Tell me if any person you've ever known in your life from the Greens to cross the floor. It's hard enough trying to think of the last person from the Liberal Party to cross the floor. Now, this is not what happens in other countries. It seems to be something, some hangover we have in Australia, that there's this immense sense of guilt if your views differ from what's been prescribed to the views that you're supposed to have. in the United States Senate, it's not a big issue. People, go across the floor one way, they cross the floor back. It's become probably becoming more sort of balkanised lately, but it's not unusual. And in England, it happens. No one cares too much about it. So what's the big thing about it in Australia? We're in the Labor Party, you're expelled from the party if you dare cross the floor. I mean, that's ludicrous. In the Greens, they apparently always have the same mind on everything, yet they're the party that stands up for, railing against imperium. They're going to shake the system. But they won't even shake their own party. If someone, they always have they're like peas in a pod. They always have exactly the same view. It's absurd.
In 2013, you switched to the lower house. You were successful, as you talked about before.
Yep. Big risk.
Huge risk. Tell me what drove you?
Well, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was at a barbecue. I think it was the MLA barbecue, and Fiona Nash came out. I knew when something was on, her head would be slightly to her side, and she walked straight up to me. And the candidate we had at that time in New England was a gentleman by the name of Richard Torbay, and we thought Richard Torbay had it in the bag. And then all of a sudden, Richard Torbay resigned, dropped out for whatever reason. And Fiona Nash said to me, "You've got to stand." I was that time leader of the Nats in the Senate, shadow cabinet minister, about to go into cabinet if we won the election. But once more, it's that case of, this is the time it's going to test your mettle. Are you going to be courageous enough or cowardly? Which one are you going to do? Maybe forget about courageous, irrelevant. Are you going to be cowardly and walk away from something that you believe should happen? And so I resigned from the Senate, was unemployed, rented a house, and tried to explain to everybody that what I was doing was sane. They thought it was totally insane. And stood against a guy who had a 23% margin, and we just went hell for leather. And sure enough, later on, once our polling got just in front, that person, which was Tony Windsor, apparently resigned from politics. He got better then and came back in the next election.
You should note that you two definitely aren't friends from what's gone on in the past 4 or 5 years. Things
he said. He said some things on Twitter which just completely and utterly defamatory and beneath anybody. And that's what always annoyed me. And people sort of hold him up on this pedestal and say, "Have you ever read what he says?"
In your maiden speech, you said a number of things. You said 2 things happen to you in Parliament: you gain weight and you lose touch.
That's correct.
Stand by that.
Yep. You're always trying to remind people, they come in and they get immersed in that boarding school, which is Australian Parliament House. You fly in there. They ring the bells, you go here. They ring the bells, you go there. You're in your little groups. You got your little inside jokes. You got your little inside conceits, or all the things that go on. And then then the bells ring on the last day, and you're back on the plane. You're out of the boarding school. But in the boarding school, you think that all that matters is what's happening in the boarding school. In a boarding school, you don't think there are other people at school anywhere else. You think that it's your world. You can't believe that there is someone somewhere else who's actually better at football and runs faster and probably a lot smarter, because you think that the boarding school's the centre of the universe. Well, that's what happens in Canberra. It's different to state parliaments, which are actually in the capital city where people go home at night. That's not what happens in Canberra. Overwhelmingly, people have flown there, and they're not with their families. It's a different world. And so there is a tendency, by reason of that environment, to lose touch with the people who you are actually representing, who sent you there. And of course, by reason that you're feeding yourself, it's not a healthy lifestyle. You've really got to concentrate on trying to stay healthy and go for a run. Don't eat just because there's a meal on every night. If you want it, doesn't mean you have to eat it.
I think you also said you had a bit of a warning. You get embroiled in the machismo of the debate in the chamber, which may collect the interest of your peers, but not the respect of the public.
That's
correct. It becomes a perverse version of mud wrestling in a suit.
That's right. That was very well. Where did I say that? My maiden speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's because you think, the troops will love this. Wow, boy, oh boy, didn't that sound great? And maybe they do, but everyone else out on the other side of the TV screen thinks you've slipped a disc. You know, they go, "What was that about?" You know, and what you say isn't even funny. You know, what you say doesn't make sense. You know, but you're saying it to the wrong audience. You're pitching to your colleagues, not pitching to or not representing the public. You know, you're trying to win the favour of the other kids in the boarding school.
Talk about popularity, celebrities. One comes to mind, Johnny Depp. What the hell happened with Pistol and Boo?
Oh well, that was kind of a funny story.
It's 2015.
So, yeah, I know. Look, he was trying to put one over us, and we had to pull him up. I heard that we'd actually got through the biosecurity bill. It was one of the biggest pieces of ledge in Australia, and I'd negotiated it through the Senate. I've got it all done. You know, it's like 600 pages of ledge. It's massive, and no one said boo about it. Like, I thought that this, you know, I'm really happy with it. Got it all done, got it voted for, got it through both houses. And I was just sitting there scratching my head like, you know, we should have got better kudos for that. And I was talking to my media advisors, you know, we didn't seem to get much, you know, kudos for that. And just while we're doing, I said, what's going on? What's on at the moment? And they said, you know, whatever, volcano, you know, butterfly flying around, you know, Mr. Smith doesn't like Mr. Smith anymore, whatever. Oh, yes, and there's this actor, Johnny Depp. He's brought a couple of dogs in. We're trying to deal with that. And I went, what? He's done what? He said, oh, you know the actor Johnny Depp? I said, yeah, I know who Johnny Depp is. What's he done? He said, he's brought his 2 teacup dogs into the country without declaring them. I went, bye-bye. Knock this one out of the park. And I didn't even tell him. I went and called a press conference, and they saw it on television. And but you know, the guy, look, I like his acting, but I didn't like his attitude. His attitude was one of, you know, I'm smarter than you. You know, I don't have to obey your silly laws. I've got a private jet, don't you see? I can bring in my dogs if I want to. I mean, God, you know, as if American dogs are going to carry any diseases. I mean, point is, the United States of America has rabies. We don't. Bali does. We don't. Other countries do. We don't. But what we do have, we have a big wild dog population. And if rabies got into Australia, there'd be no controlling it. And that would cause massive problems. Now, one of the things I like, if there's anything to like about that debate or that issue, everybody in the world pathologically disliked me. You know, I was getting smashed on every channel in the United States. You know, I was vastly better known than the Prime Minister, vastly better known than the Prime Minister, and because of this issue, Johnny Depp's dogs. But as much as they were smashing me overseas, Australians loved it because they wanted Australians to stick up for Australia. And over, I'd get comments like, "I'd never vote for you, but you're right on this. You're right on this." You know, because people, they don't want another person to think they've got some sort of peculiar right that no other Australian has. You know, you come to my nation, you obey my laws. Don't want to obey my laws? Get out.
So it was a version of the tall poppy syndrome playing out there.
Well, I don't know.
Mate, I'm not necessarily saying you, but Australians were happy in that regard?
Australians were happy because we have a belief in our own sovereignty. And Australians do take, I don't know if they understand it themselves, but they take their biosecurity important. They take their clean, you know, some people like Australia as a clean label, the providence label of Australia. Other people say, I believe in my nations, therefore you must believe in my laws to respect my nation. Other people clearly understand what rabies means and they do not want rabies in Australia. And other people, it's just a case of, oh mate, you're just a smart aleck, aren't you? You're a smart ass, aren't you? All your tattoos and you're so clever and you can just put one over us because we're stupid. Well, sucked in, you got busted.
You're quite happy.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
He wasn't. I still bring it up.
And you wouldn't do it differently?
No. When you do the risk matrix of how rabies would most likely come into Australia, guess what they say? People smuggling in teacup dogs, and that's exactly what he did.
In 2016, you became the leader of the Nationals. What was that like as a bush kid to become the Deputy Prime Minister?
Oh, it was incredible. I remember saying to Woolbrook Public School, I think I sent them a photo when I was the acting Prime Minister saying, you know, you can come from Woolbrook and get to here. You can do it.
What's it like when you sit in those high-level meetings and briefings and hear the most intimate, private details about what our security agencies are up to, the threats that we face,
Telling the truth. Most of the time you're not hearing much more than what you probably heard on the television. And most of it's statement of the bleeding obvious. A lot of times suspicions that, you find are facts, but very rarely do you listen to something and go, God, I've never heard of that. It might happen from time to time, but most of the time it's sort of perfunctory meetings about things that you wouldn't be surprised if everybody else down the street hadn't got the same information. It's important for people to understand that there is no grand architecture of government that is all pervasive and seeing things and managing things that you don't know about and looking after you. It's a lot more rudimentary than that, and you're a lot more responsible for your own future than you realise. Don't think that the government's such and such happening, but there are secret people out there watching them and they'll all find out about it. Not really, no.
You're not getting told what the SAS are up to, or about the capture of Osama bin Laden beforehand, or...
Well, that's American. Look, I'll give you another tip.
But we wouldn't be looped in on that as members of the Five Eyes?
Another thing that I used to do, and I used to say to my staff, I don't want to know about anything I don't need to know. That way I can never be accused of leaking something, because you can't leak something you never heard. So I'd only ask to be told in my briefings what I really needed to know, because there might be a slip of the tongue. You say something that could have consequences, and I just didn't want that.
What's it like when that gets taken away from you?
Oh, I suppose it's really funny. When you're there are times you wish you weren't, so you could say exactly what you think. And I suppose when you're not there, you have a sense of loss of, these are the things we could be doing now, but I can't. Democracy means at times you want to better express your opinions. The higher you go, the more you're corralled into what you can say and what you can't say. But you can have effect anywhere. I genuinely think that wherever you are in the Senate, if you really want to have effect, you can drive for an effect. You can drive for an outcome. You'll generally find you're having an outcome when people get really angry with you. That's usually a pretty good calibration that you're getting somewhere. In cabinet, they're getting angry with you in cabinet. Or in the leadership group, they're getting very angry with you in the leadership group. As a backbench, they're getting very angry with you in the backbench. That generally means you're getting something done. Because if you're just a good little boy and shut up and say nothing, they'll think you're a wonderful person.
So the angrier they are, the better you're doing for your constituents?
Well, you're obviously having effect. Now, you might be having a bad effect, but you're having effect. And you've got to try and make sure you're having a good effect and driving a good outcome for what you think is reasonable.
Is going from losing the job as Deputy Prime Minister, as leader of your party, is that a bit like, it's a bad analogy, but is it a bit like going from business class to the back of the plane, nothing's ever the same again?
I suppose yes and no.
Can you ever be comfortable on a backbench?
Yeah, of course you can. But you get the frustrations you have is when you see something that you believe is needs to be done, or the frustrations you have is when something is said that you know is incorrect, or but it's not. I don't. I'll put something here that you will find surprising, but it is the truth. As you well know, there was a leadership ballot. Now, people always said you must have been terribly upset when you weren't successful. You know what the truth is? Not really. Oh, not really. I sort of walked out and, in a funny way, breathed a sigh of relief. I might have had frustrations later on about who got selected for the ministry, because I wanted to make sure that people who supported me weren't persecuted. That certainly frustrated me. But personally, it surprised me how much it didn't really. I wasn't going, oh, woe is me. I sort of got over it real quick.
Why?
Because I'm probably aware of the work that's involved if you do the job, what was in front of you, and how the moment you do that, you can forget about going home. You can forget about a whole range of things, because if you're going to do the job properly, get ready to live on a plane, get ready to be in high octane arguments with a lot of people all the time. And because that comes with the territory.
So why did you push for it? Why did you drive your name forward?
Well, I didn't really. I was nominated by other people.
But they wouldn't have done that unless they knew you
Yeah,
wanted
of course.
the job.
I always said that. But, I just suppose 2 years out from election, if you're going to do something, this is when you do it. If you're going to lance the ball, lance it now before we start sitting in Parliament. Get it over and done with.
Do you lay in bed at night time thinking about the job?
No, I don't. No, I don't. No,
People
I don't.
find that hard to believe.
No, I don't. It is an absolute fact that you have frustrations about issues. You have frustrations about outcomes. You have a fury if someone says something or you hear about it and it's a misrepresentation of who you are or something you've done, or they're using some sort of nefarious process to try and belittle you. You have a fury about that. That is more of an ego of standing your ground and fighting for your good name. But if you said, do you have a longing for the actual office itself? Not really, no. That's not it. It's more the case of, a personal affront about something that's said or about you, and you wanting to, correct the record, or you believe someone's taken a swipe at you, so you're going to take a swipe back, or. But it's not a yearning for an office. No, I don't think that. You have great respect for it. You understand what can be done with it, but there's not a great yearning for it. That's, I think, is an honest, for me, an honest analysis of my of the position.
If you're blasé about it,
no, it's not blasé.
Well, if you weren't fussed about not being leader, can you give a commitment then that you wouldn't have another tilt at it?
Well, see, I've got no desire to bring on a challenge. I really want the McCormick-Morrison government to prevail, and I understand exactly, because I understand the media. I've been in this game for a long time.
But that's not a no, though.
But
we all know how this plays out. You have another crack.
Yeah, but when you say you're going to have another crack, people think you're planning for another crack, and I'm not. And that's the whole issue. Even what I like that people are saying, we didn't even know that none of us knew with about 3 or 4 days or 3 days or 2 days that there was any possibility that there was ever going to be a leadership spill. So one thing the National Party is not good at is planning that sort of stuff. So it just sort of fell over and ended up in that position.
But to others that just looks more Machiavellian, that you sat there and plotted very successfully in the dead of night to bring this on. But it was unsuccessful.
That's the whole point.
Well, it just looks like you're a bad accountant because you can't count the numbers.
Oh well, anyway, whatever. Anyway. The going back to what you said. There's no desire. But if you go and say, will you rule that out forever and ever and ever, amen. Well, you can't. That's also stupid, because then you're ruling out every circumstance. What happens, God knows. What happens if you find out that someone's a bank robber? Or what happens if all of a sudden there's some cataclysmic event and 3 people die in a car accident? I mean, who knows? You can't be held to those sort of things. All you can be held to is what's in your mind right now. Are you planning right now to try and bring this event up again? No, I'm not. Do you understand what's happening right now? Yes, I do. What's happening right now is the media saying, we'll be turning this around to saying, he's trying to bring down the government. And that's the last thing I want. So how do you get away from that? Get out of sight. Can
I change pace and say, how the hell didn't you know you're a dual citizen?
That was a disaster. Well, that's another... well, I'll tell you what, because my dad is not a dual citizen. And this is exactly how it happened. My father was a returned serviceman, okay, from after the Second World War. He got smashed up. He didn't end up, and he was on embarkation or about to go to the Italian peninsula. He never even got there. He got smashed up on the docks. They dropped an anti-aircraft gun on him. So he got what they call repatriated, and part of his repatriation was they allowed you to go to university. There was only a vet school. He got into vet. The only vet school was in Australia. Over he comes, the vet. Everybody at that stage was not an Australian citizen nor a New Zealand citizen. They were British citizens. So there was no citizenship issue. Then, subsequently, they brought in the New Zealand Citizenship Act and the Australian Citizenship Act, and people became, respectively, New Zealand citizens and Australian citizens from where they were born. But the people didn't realise that. It was something that happened in another nation's parliament. So Dad went on, had kids here, And I think it was in 1978, he went to become a Justice of the Peace, and they signed him up and said, "Oh, mate, false stat dec, mate. You're not an Australian citizen. You're a New Zealand citizen." He said, "Oh, we'll fix that." Fix that. Off he went. Now that was 1978, when I would have been, 11 years old, or something like that, maybe 10, 11 years old. Unfortunately, between him, the New Zealand Citizenship Act of whatever it is, 1948, and Dad renouncing or becoming solely an Australian citizen in 1978, I was born. So the only New Zealander in the house was me. But I didn't know, and it's so weird.
You laugh now.
I was, born in a Tamworth-based hospital, served in the Australian Reserves, been to New Zealand once. It was for a funeral, and I got kicked out of Parliament. It's just crazy.
In 2018, your personal life became the front page of every paper.
Mm-hmm.
Were you surprised by the way that played out?
That's one of the things when you talk about anger and resentments and seeds and wanting to square the account. A lot of that comes from that sort of time. I have to be honest. That's if there are angers or resentments I hold, you can bet your life you can trace it back to then. I felt that if there was a problem, I'd created it, and I deserved to be, thumped for it. What I hated about that is other people who are just innocent, who are not public figures, being dragged into it, and being subject to complete humiliation by reason of their association with me, rather than by anything they ever did. It was my fault. Nobody else's. So why did, to be quite frank, why did Vicky, as a private citizen, end up on the front page of a paper as a pregnant lady walking across the road? I mean, what was her crime? Why do you have the right to do that to a person? Go after me. I'm a public figure. But leave other people alone.
You said that you knew it would cost you your job.
Yep.
Why didn't you resign? Say you're going to take 12 months to step back, sit on the back bench, and then that would have given you a much better chance to relaunch your leadership credentials and have another crack at the top job.
Oh, I don't know, mate. Look, you're almost under a siege mentality at the end. The media outside your door 24/7.
But you knew it was coming. I mean, this thing happens over 9 months.
Of course I knew it was coming. Yeah, and of course I knew it was going to cost me a job. I just, in the end, it becomes a brawl because people are saying things that it's just invective, it's personal, it's attack, and then all sense of reason goes out the window.
Barnaby made a shocking error of judgment and appalled all of us. Malcolm Turnbull, his doorstop, his press conference. Mm-hmm. Where were you when you heard that?
I was in the office next door watching, and I watched it on television. I opened the window and I watched it. I could see it just out there. But oh well, that's and this goes back into, these are the sort of things that, Anyway, that's.
Were you too close?
At the start, really close, and I think we were really effective. And then it was in the interest of others to drive us apart, and I think we both fell for that.
What was your response? Your response was to get up and strike back, wasn't it?
I just thought he was involving himself in a sort of a personal issue that was not his place to be.
Do you think that world of woe that he talked about, you said you had an affair with a younger woman, do you think that it would have been perceived as badly if it was an older woman?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. The whole thing was just, it was just a massive storm. Whatever, it's humans have strengths, they have their frailties, it's life, but I think if you walk around, I think you've got to be really careful making judgments about other people. Leave that up to their priest or their God. Don't do it yourself. You want to make sort of personal judgments about people, because where does that lead? Then everybody can do that. Do you think that people are not aware of their own faults and failings? Of course they are. They don't need to be to be announced from the podium in Parliament House. Do we go now through every member of Parliament and tell everybody about what they believe might be the fault of person A, B, C, D, E, F, G? I'm sure the person's aware of it themselves. They're probably dealing with it themselves, and they're probably torturing themselves over it. You don't need any more assistance.
I think his argument was that it was an abuse of power. Do you see it as an abuse of power?
No, of course not. If it was, then 2 kids later, it doesn't look like that, does it?
Do you think that he was using it for his own personal gain?
I don't know. That's a question for him. I think that ultimately it didn't help either of us. I'm absolutely certain about that. It was something that started to not only undermine. It was obviously undermining me, but unbeknownst to him, it was undermining him as well. It was doing maybe what other people wanted, and say, well, let's make sure we split these two up so they go in 2 different directions, and then we can knock them both off.
Where were you when you found out you were going to be a dad again?
I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
No.
Can you talk about how you felt when you found out you're going to be a dad?
Nope. That's all off record. No, I'll talk about things that are in the public record and that I can give an account for myself, but I'm not going to talk about things in the private setting.
Can you say if you're a good dad?
I don't know. I think that's a judgment for your kids. I suppose it's. I want to be a good dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have visions of you wanting to storm into Malcolm Turnbull's office. Did you?
Yeah, I went around straight away. Yeah.
What did you say?
I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, as you would, as anybody else would too, I imagine.
Can I ask what it's like having a verbal argument with the Prime Minister? Is there a level of decorum at those moments?
At the start, yeah, you always respect the office, but if you believe that the office has gone from a duty, when you believe that their discussion has gone from a purpose of their office into a purpose of that's personal and outside their office, then you revert from talking to the office to talking to the person, and talking to the person can be very, very abrupt and to the point.
Yeah.
A Prime Minister has a right to office and a right to make hard calls, and on those issues, yeah, there should be decorum and there should be respect to understand what they're doing. But they spear off into something that's that is basically not part of their role, or excessive within their role, or not following the proper process that their role should follow. Then within that you have the gradations of how you respond.
It was said categorically that some people had tried to put pressure on you not having Seb. Have you rectified that with those people who pressured you since?
Sorry, I didn't quite...
In the big sit-down interview you did, it was made clear that some members within the party had said that the child shouldn't be born, that you shouldn't have young Seb.
Well, that's a question for,
I'm just wondering if you went and settled the score with those people.
I don't think it's surprising. Look, I don't want to go back there, but I'm just going to say this. There was an awful lot of pressure that was, you could see it on television. I think as another prominent politician said this to me, and then I'm going to stop answering this. He said, Barnaby, you're not the first person to get a person pregnant in Parliament, but you're definitely the first one to have the baby. And I think that sort of summed up a lot of other... And, well, every time you look at Seb, it was the right decision.
Can I ask you the intersection of your faith?
Mm-hmm.
People always talk about Catholic guilt.
Yep.
And you're a overt Catholic, a very religious man.
No, I'm religious, but I'm not good. I've got to always really pull this up. I'm not a saint. People would know that. I have a hell of a lot of failings. I get a lot from my faith as guidance, but if that's the path I take, that's a completely different story.
Yeah.
But I hate the I'm not. Mate, I'm the person who sits down in the back corner of the church and tries to get in and get out without being seen.
Can you understand why that annoys some people then, that you might have an opinion on abortion, or you might have an opinion on same-sex marriage, based on religious grounds, and then you might not necessarily be the...
Can I only look on same-sex marriage? Yeah, I can understand people having anger about that, because it's really a point of view. It's where you are with it. My position on abortion is entirely different. I don't need any religion to hold that position. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's to do with just thinking about it, and sort of questioning myself as to when did I attain the rights that I have right now? Where was the juncture that apparently before I had no rights, and after which I have absolute rights? And do you have rights when you're conscious of your rights? Well, I'm not conscious of my rights when I'm asleep. If I get smashed and fall over, I'm not conscious of my rights. I've still got them. Before I was, I don't think I'd be conscious of my rights probably before I was 5, 6. But of course I had them. So where do I go back to say, the day after you're born, you've got rights, but the day literally 10 minutes before and half an hour before, you have none? It doesn't make sense. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's got everything to do with just sit back and think about it. Now, what I do know is that my views are not other people's views, but I'm entitled to mine, and they're entitled to theirs, and I'll respect theirs, and they may or may not respect mine, and I'm always have the debate, and it's just what I was saying at the start. Now, the coward would say, don't talk about that, don't say that, because people will not like it when you say that, and that's just the time you got to say, okay, that means I really do have to say it, because otherwise, you're taking the worst path. You're taking the coward's path of just shutting up because it might hurt you.
I want to wrap this up for you. Do you remember your university motto?
Yeah, accept ante modus. From wisdom comes moderation, from Tacitus.
What have you learnt?
From wisdom comes moderation. That's all very well for Tacitus, isn't it?
Would you have done anything differently, Barnaby?
Of course. Tell me the person walking on the planet who wouldn't do something differently.
Well, I'll ask it another way. Is there anything you regret?
Tell me the person walking the planet who doesn't have regrets. Everybody's going to have regrets. There's no perfect human being out there. You do the best job you can, and you accept your failings and you accept your faults, and you try to go forward and do a better job tomorrow. That's it. If you're looking for perfection, you're going to have a lonely old life. Everybody's got faults. It's how you deal with them that matters.
You've got a troop of daughters and now 2 sons.
Yeah.
What have you learnt as a father?
You are going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, and you have to understand that people become adults and make their own decisions. You're not perfect. They're not perfect. World's not perfect, and you just you try to do the best you can. Do you hope they've got sympathetic ears when they hear a few stories when they get older? I don't. I hope so. I love my children. I love them to death. I just did the best job I could. Been a blast. Yep. Okay. Thank you.